Hey everybody, this is Mike at Mike's Total Dragon Channel, and today we are going to be talking about comic book terms, and we're going to try to give some good examples to those terms and which terms applies to what situation. That way we can get everyone on the same page, and we can kind of prevent a little bit of confusion I'm seeing people have when they're discussing certain things online, and that way we'll be able to clear it up for everybody. So here we go. We're going to start off with the first one is going to be a now. This is probably the most well-known event right here, Crisis on Infinite Earths. It is an event that DC launched in the early 80s. It is what I like to refer to as a line-wide event in that it touched every aspect of the DC universe. Now, your events, I like to define an event as a storyline that occurs across the whole universe, comic book universe, whether it be Marvel or DC, and it occurs in every book. If not in every book, every major character is involved in it. And it is something that affects, it's like a huge, this is like a huge event, I guess you would say, and it's not it's something that really you see only once a year, although nowadays we might be seeing them a little bit more regularly than once a year. We see those big events, but for all intents and purposes, for myself as an old school comic book fan, I classify an event as something that happens once a year, and it occurs across all the titles that a publisher is putting out. If not all the titles, then I would have to say at least 95 to 98% of them that event touches on. So that's our first term right there, event. So the next one we are going to be using is it spins out of an event, and it is what is known as the tie-in. Tie-in. Now this is an issue of Savage Avengers, and it is a tie-in to a event that Marvel had called the King in Black. Now this shows the events of King in Black and how heroes are interacting with people that are involved in it. It shows a lot of the fallout from the event, a lot of the things that are not happening in the main event book. Like this would show events that are not going on in the main King of Black series. This shows stuff that happens, as they say, in between the gutters. So this is what we call a tie-in book. Now, sometimes tie-in books are regular books like Savage Avengers. It's number 17 right here. They fit this in as a tie-in. Sometimes tie-in books have their own miniseries. So what you would have would be, kind of like Marvel recently had with their Blood Hunt. They had a bunch of tie-in miniseries, books that did not take place within, or storylines, or that I should say, that did not take place in ongoing books, and got their own miniseries that kind of tied in to like the ongoing story. So a tie-in can be within the works of a previously existing book, or it can be in a separate book that is created specifically to tie in with that ongoing event. So now our next term is going to be crossover. So crossover and tie-in, kind of similar, but not the same. Now this is a good example right here of what I like to call a crossover. Crisis on Earth Prime, Book 1 takes place in Justice League in America. It then crosses over into All-Star Squadron. See, Book 2. Which then crosses back into Justice League of America. Book 3, which then crosses back into All-Star Squadron Book 4. That is what I like to refer to as a crossover. It is when 2 books, 3 books, or 4 books, the last page on the first book references picking up the story in the next book. Like, say for instance right here, we'll turn to the last page of this All-Star Squadron book. Let me see if I can find it. To be concluded in the pulse-pounding pages of Justice League. All-Star crosses over. Justice League, Book 5. It is really like what I like to call like serialized action. You know, kind of like the old black and white movie serials that you would see that would end on one day, and then you had to go and pick up to see what happened on the next day. So that is what I like to refer to as a crossover. Crossover, very similar to a tie-in and very similar to an event, but is a much smaller scale. That's what I use to distinguish the two terms. Alright, so our next book we are going to have is we are going to have a couple different examples here. And this example is going to be called a reboot. Now, a lot of times what you have, and especially with DC, in their event books, as they are so prone to do, especially now, you will have a reboot of a character and a story after it wraps up. This specific example right here, after Crisis was over, DC chose to reboot Superman. Basically what they did was, after Crisis, they launched this as a brand new #1, brand new continuity, brand new Superman, brand new stories, brand new environment for him to interact in. So a lot of what that is for getting people on the boat who felt overwhelmed by previous years of continuity. So they do that relaunch and say, hey, previous 500, 600, 700 issues of Superman were intimidating to you. Check this out. Start from 1. You can get it on the ground floor. Now, our next example of a reboot is a little bit on the smaller side. Fantastic Four #1. This issue of Fantastic Four #1 takes place after the big Marvel event Onslaught. And what they did was they rebooted Fantastic Four, ended those 400 and something issues previously, and launched a new one. Brand new introduction to the characters, brand new situations, brand new year 1 storytelling, and it's all started right here with that issue #1 that we love to see and signifies a great new starting point and is a very accessible entry point for new readers. So now, they also did the same thing with Captain America, they did the same thing with Thor, and they also did the same thing with Iron Man at the time. So they launched all those out of Onslaught as brand new reboots of the characters and their stories to make it accessible. And they had the new hot teams, Jim Lee, on there, all to entice new readers to come aboard. So that is reboot. Now, up next, we are going to have 2 very separate examples. But of the same thing. This is going to be relaunch. So now, our first example of a relaunch is how New Mutants 100, the last issue of the series. They ended it, relaunched it as X-Force #1. Same characters, same Rob Liefeld, but we call it a relaunch. And the reason they call it a relaunch is because, again, let's get that #1 out there. People like to buy #1s. It gives them the feeling that they're starting starting from scratch, and they can get in on the ground floor. So this is our first example of a relaunch. Now, our second example of a relaunch, Fantastic Four. This was relaunched out of the previous Fantastic Four book that we just saw by Jim Lee. Back to the characters that we know and love. Same storyline that they had pre-relaunch, before Onslaught. Same events, same memories, same experiences. But we've got that brand new #1. We've got new creative team, Scott Lobdell, Alan Davis. This is what we call a relaunch. Now, sometimes, and I've started seeing this recently in more modern times, you will see multiple relaunches with the same creative team on there and the same concept of the book. She-Hulk, I'm thinking about you. So it's at that point, as an older reader, I find myself thinking, well, why are you even relaunching this book if you're going to keep the same team on there? And the book's going to be basically about the same thing. But like I said, they want that #1. The #1 is what drives sales, at least for initially. So that is a relaunch. Now up next, we have, now this one is what we're going to call a retcon. Now, this is an interesting issue to choose for a retcon, because this retcon takes place in a storyline, Fatal Attractions, that ran through all the X-Men titles. So you've kind of got a little bit of everything in here. You've got a crossover, and you've got a retcon. Now, retcon, basically what that means is they have went back, changed something in the continuity. You know, they hit us with the old, everything you thought you knew is wrong. Sometimes retcons are very accepted very easily. Other times people kind of hate them and despise them, and they can leave a very bitter taste in fans' mouth. Identity Crisis and Dr. Light being the prime example, which is probably one of the most horrific and unnecessary retcons ever. But in any case, this retcon right here involves Wolverine and them showing us that his claws are in fact made out of bone and not adamantium. So this is a piece of continuity that we had never known about. We had always thought that his claws were just straight up adamantium. However, this right here shows us that his claws are bone and they have been coated in adamantium. So whenever you have something, a piece of lore or a piece of mythology about the character that has changed, that is what we like to refer to as a retcon, or as I like to call it, everything you knew was wrong. So we've only got a couple more left. This one right here, these are two really awesome examples of what I call Elseworld stories. Elseworld stories mostly is a term. Elseworlds is pretty much a term used only by DC. Marvel uses it, but they call it a what if. To me, the Elseworlds is a lot more broader spectrum than what the what if covers. But in any case, these are basically like alternate reality stories
I consider anything that does not happen and occur in mainline continuity an Elseworlds. You know, Superman being found as an orphan by the Kents or by the Waynes and raised as Bruce Wayne and watches his parents get shot. Elseworlds. It's Batman, but he's in the Jack the Ripper era. Elseworlds. Like I said, you see that now. Nowadays, continuity is not really as widely adhered to as it used to be, which is probably for the best part. Who wants stories being hung up on minutia from one story, one comic book a guy wrote back in 1983 or 20, 30 years ago, or what have you. But to me, I'm old school. I still consider anything that is not set within the main universe Elseworld story, or if you're in Marvel, you can call it a what if, but you're just really splitting hairs. It's basically the same concept. Anything that doesn't affect the status quo in the main storyline, the main universe. And then for our last one, we've got special editions and prestige format. Now, basically, when you see something called special edition or prestige format, it's a collection. It speaks really to how the book is packaged. Like this Earth 1, Volume 2, I would call this a special edition, or you might call it a prestige format, because it is the dressing is a little more fancier than what you would just see as a regular on the shelf Wednesday new comic. As we can see from this one, so it costs a little extra, $24.99. It's a thicker book, gives you more story. Special edition, New Mutants, book 50, 64 pages. That tells us it's twice as big as a regular book. Uncanny X-Men team up with the Teen Titans. This is a special edition. It's a bigger book than what's on your weekly shelf, but prestige format, special edition, premium, prestige graphic novel, that type of deal. It all refers to the packaging. A lot of times you'll see it being a hardcover. A lot of times it will just be like a extended page count type book. The other thing that allows you to see these and differentiate between others is the numbering. This is number 1 right here. This is number 1 right here. Volume 2. So these your special editions, your fancy collections like this, they don't have the high issue number like your regular stuff does. So that allows you to that's another way to pick them out and be able to keep them apart from your weekly books that come out. But that is a quick wrap up of comic book terms and trying to get the right definition and using them when is in the correct the correct phrase, the correct context, I guess you would say. Because I see a lot of people say, oh, DC's doing relaunches, DC's doing reboots, Marvel's doing relaunches, Marvel's doing reboots, when they're, using the wrong term for them, especially comes to Marvel. I don't care what people will tell you. Marvel has never rebooted. They have never done a line-wide reboot like Crisis on Infinite Earths or DC New 52. So don't ever let anyone apply that reboot term to the Marvel Universe. They've relaunched books and they have had new advertising strategies, like all new, all different,
which is just a slogan, you know. But don't get those terms twisted. And you guys be careful. Take care of yourself. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.